Hello, humans, and welcome to another episode of the Cartridge and Disc Podcast. This is your Gen X Gamer here, and I could probably call this series Random Thoughts. You know what, guys? Sometimes when I'm just tired, it's been a long day, I kind of just stare off into the distance, and all these different thoughts come into my head. Usually about video games, believe it or not. That's what I gravitate towards when I've had a stressful day or a long day, what have you. And now even more when I'm thinking about content for the show, since I've had limited time, and the time that I do have needs to be used in the most productive way, because sometimes I'm tired from not sleeping, bottles, diapers, you know the deal. Well, I've had to really become more efficient, and even my daydreams now are just when I'm dozing off, thinking about something. I'm thinking about either shorts or what should I do for the channel as far as topics, for the show. And my wife asked me, what are you thinking about? Like many other significant others do, right? And by this time she's learned that the answer is not going to be very deep. It's usually going to be video game related. And of course, she wasn't disappointed, because I said, I'm thinking about Street Fighter 2, the Vanilla Edition. And why was I thinking about that, guys? Well, I don't know. These are just random thoughts that come into my head. But then I started thinking about the characters, the original 8, if you will, and how I played that game when I finally got Street Fighter at home, and how I played it, how I played those original 8. The first, that came out in the arcade. In the arcade, it was a different experience, because when I was playing, it was always full. So there wasn't a real chance to learn other characters. When it came to, when the game actually released on the Super Nintendo, it was great, except I couldn't afford it. Games were like $100, believe it or not. That game was retailing at some places for $94.95. On the street, you could get it for $100. People were that desperate for the game. It was just crazy. Regardless, guys, when I started playing, a lot of times when I played the arcade, I'd play as player 2, and I didn't want to choose Ryu because the other person was already choosing Ryu. So I would play Ken a lot of times. And Ken has become my favorite character. And when I first got the game at home, which was a while after it was released on the Super Nintendo, I wanted to go through the 8, something I never did in the arcade. And I started off with Ken. I finished the game with Ken. And after that, what I wanted to do is do everything that I do at the arcade. Now, this is what's in my mind. I had gone through all this scenario. And I was telling my wife about it, and she kind of told me to stop. She didn't tell me to stop. She just looked very uninterested in the story, so I changed the subject. But what I did is I played with Ken, and then afterwards, I played with Blanca. I just wanted something completely different. I just wanted to play different characters and go through the story. The game itself, to this day, has so much replayability. Of course, there's other versions that are better, but just to reminisce, just to remember when you actually fell in love with the series. And this series has, been part of my life for decades now. And those of you who are already 30, you in your 30s, you can say the same thing now for many games. That's when you actually start feeling your age, right? So after playing with Ken, then I went with Blanca, then I went with Chun-Li, because I really, I wanted to go through the gauntlet. And then after Chun-Li, I went back to Ryu, finished it with Ryu, which, moves are pretty similar to Ken. And then I went to Honda, finished the game with him. And then I finished with the last 3 characters that for me, are the ones that I had the hardest time learning the moves for. Number 1 was Daoism, and with him, let me say this, I enjoyed the game a lot more than I thought I would, because of the type of moves he had. I had to think about the game a little more. I had to strategize a little bit more. And of course, you know, I finished the game. It took me longer. It took me way longer. Now, the one that took me the longest was Guile, believe it or not. I was always terrible with Guile. There's always a couple of characters that make people struggle or they don't even like. Guile was one of them for me. I just, for the life of me, I could do the sonic boom, but the kick, I had oh man, I could never do it in the arcade, and I was just frustrated with him. I could just never get it down. Too steep of a learning curve for me, right? But I finally did it. You know, in the home version. And then the one that really just gave me trouble, the one move that for me always gave me trouble. I tried in the arcade once and I never did it again. It was just a waste of money for me to do it in the arcade. Was Zangief in trying to do that 360 move. Man, that just, let me tell you guys, I must have spent $20 trying to get that thing down, and never ever in my life could I get it down. And with a Super Nintendo controller, I think it was even worse. I felt better, believe it or not, with a Genesis controller, the 6-button Genesis controller playing Champion Edition. I had a lot better time. But I wanted to go back and play, right? Go back and play the game as it was meant to be. And at that time, that was it. You know, the Super Nintendo was the closest thing that you could get to the original game. And it was all kinds of craziness. I remember there being a Game Shark out there that would let you play like with the boss characters if you wanted to. There was all kinds of things. But I mean, you were talking, man, you were talking about almost $150 to get the setup to do that. Imagine that, $150 back then. That's how crazy the whole Street Fighter scene was, because you had to buy the adapter to be able to unlock the bosses and then buy the game. So my neighbor that, you know, at that point, you know, he had a good job and everything, and he loved Street Fighter 2. And man, he got the game, he got the adapter, he was unlocking characters, and people would just be over his house. I'm telling you, there were days that there must have been 20 people outside his door, and what he would do is he would put his TV in his garage outside so people can watch him play. Now, this fucker wouldn't let anybody play most of the time unless he was beating him up, but a lot of times he would just run through the game and play, and he would let people watch but not let him play. You know, he was one of those guys. But for me, guys, it was great, man. I love this series. I've always loved this series, and as new ones come up, I always go back to the originals, and I think about the originals, and I think about all the great times. Forget about the crossovers. I'm just talking about, you know, regular Street Fighter and its regular progression throughout the years. It's always been an enjoyable series for me, and it will always be a very special part of my collection. All right, guys, those are my thoughts. How did you guys run through the gauntlet? Did you like the original 8? How would you rank them? Did you do it different? Hey, maybe you have random thoughts too. I have a lot of random thoughts regarding video games, and they're probably going to end up as episodes. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you on the next one. Make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. If you really want to support, go ahead and join. I will catch you on the next one. Take care.